My mother-in-law arrived with a notary the morning after my wedding to take my company. She had no idea. My grandfather had spent 2 years building the perfect trap. The doorbell rang at 8:07 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked my phone when I heard it. Reflexive, half awake, still wearing Ethan's old Georgetown sweatshirt, my wedding night hair held together by 2 pins and sheer stubbornness. The digital clock on my nightstand read 8:07, and I remember thinking, with the soft, newlywed certainty of someone who had been married for less than 20 hours, it's probably a delivery. It was not a delivery. Standing on the porch of our home in Alexandria, Virginia, in a charcoal blazer and heels that had absolutely no business being on anyone's feet at 8 in the morning, was my mother-in-law, Patricia Whitmore. She was holding a leather portfolio folder the color of old money. Behind her stood a small, anxious man in a clip-on tie, clutching a briefcase with both hands, the way people hold things they're not sure they should be carrying. He introduced himself when I opened the door as Mr. Bellamy, Notary Public. Patricia introduced herself by walking past me into my house without being invited. "Good morning, Claire," she said, setting the folder on our dining table with the brisk efficiency of someone who had been rehearsing this moment for considerably longer than I had been standing in my own doorway. "We have some matters to handle." I stood on my threshold with one hand still on the door handle and felt something cold move through me. Not panic, not yet, but the specific cellular recognition that something has gone very wrong in a way you haven't fully mapped yet. I was 29 years old, 11 months divorced from my first relationship, and I had just married Ethan Whitmore in a ceremony so beautiful that 3 separate guests told me afterward it was the best wedding they'd ever attended. There had been white roses and candlelight and a string quartet. Ethan had cried when he saw me at the end of the aisle. Genuinely, openly, the kind of crying that makes people around you cry too because it can't be faked. And now his mother was in my dining room with a notary, a leather portfolio, and an agenda. I had 17 seconds of not knowing what was in that folder. Then I found out, and everything my grandfather had warned me about, everything he had spent the last 2 years quietly, meticulously preparing for, began to unfold exactly as he'd predicted. I need to tell you about my grandfather first, because none of the rest of this makes sense without him. His name was Raymond Aldridge. He was 81 years old when he died, 14 months before my wedding, and he was the kind of man who understood things about people, about what they wanted, about what they would do to get it, with a clarity that could feel, if you were on the wrong side of it, almost supernatural. He'd built Whitestone Instruments from 3 employees in a rented garage in 1979 to a precision manufacturing firm with contracts across the aerospace and defense sectors. He had watched people try to take pieces of it from him, in various creative configurations, for 40 years. He was very good at identifying the shape of an attempt before it arrived. He was also very good at letting people think they were winning. When he was diagnosed with a progressive cardiac condition, in the spring before he died, he called me into his study and had a conversation that I have replayed in my memory so many times since that it feels less like a memory and more like a recording. He told me that he was leaving me the company, not portions of it, the company, through a trust structured by his attorney, Arthur Harlan of Harlan & Associates in Bethesda, Maryland, with 22 years of estate and trust law practice. Whitestone Instruments would pass to me in full on the date of his death, held in my name alone through a vehicle designed with considerable legal artistry to be difficult to challenge, transfer, or touch without my explicit and documented consent. He told me not to tell anyone, not friends, not colleagues, not romantic partners. "Why?" I asked. He looked at me for a long moment. He had blue eyes, very pale, and the particular directness in them of a man who had spent decades seeing through things. "Because money doesn't show you who people are," he said. "It shows you who they become when they think they can get some." I thought he was being philosophical. I thought it was the wisdom of an old man who had seen too many complicated business disputes and was extrapolating too broadly. I was wrong. He was being precise. He said one other thing before I left that day, and I want to get the words exactly right because I've said them to myself many times since. He said, "If someone comes for what I'm leaving you, and someone will, I want you to have already called Arthur. I want the response to already be in motion. Don't react. Execute." He died 4 months later. I cried for 3 weeks, on and off, in the way you cry for someone who was not just a person, but a whole framework for understanding the world. Arthur Harlan executed the trust transfer without complications. Whitestone Instruments, valued at the time of my grandfather's death at approximately $15.4 million, became mine in full. I went back to work on Monday. I told no one. I met Ethan Whitmore 6 weeks later at a conference in Washington, D.C. He was charming in the particular way of men who grew up being told they were charming. Easy, fluent, practiced. But there was something underneath it that felt genuine. He was funny. He was curious. He asked good questions and listened to the answers. We had dinner twice that week, and then I couldn't stop thinking about him for the rest of the month. He knew I was in business operations. He knew I consulted. That was true. I was the actual operational director of Whitestone Instruments. I ran the company, had been running it alongside my grandfather for 3 years before his death. I just didn't volunteer the ownership structure or the valuation. My grandfather's voice, in my head, because money doesn't show you who people are. I told myself I would tell Ethan eventually, when the time was right, when I was sure. I was not sure. Not because I didn't love him. I did, or I believed I did, which is its own kind of terrifying in retrospect. But because my grandfather had placed something in me, a seed of careful watchfulness, and whenever I prepared myself to have the conversation, conversation, something in me went still and quiet, and I thought, not yet. He proposed after 14 months. We were in Rome on the terrace of a restaurant above the Tiber, and he was genuinely nervous, trembling slightly, stumbling a little over the words, and I said yes because in that moment I could not imagine any version of my life that made more sense than this one. I still hadn't told him about the company. I had told myself I'd do it before the wedding. I ran out of before. Here is what I had missed in the weeks leading up to the ceremony. Small things, easy to rationalize, the kind of things that feel like nothing until they are everything. In February, 2 months before the wedding, I came home from a site visit to find Ethan in my home office. He was at my desk. When I walked in, he closed the laptop, my personal laptop, not his, with a speed that didn't quite match the casualness of his explanation. I was looking for the charger. Yours has the same port. I said nothing. My charger was in the same drawer it was always in. In March, Patricia called me for a lunch I hadn't expected. She was warmer than usual, and the warmth had an agenda quality to it. Too much focus, too many leading questions about my business interests, my financial situation, what my long-term plans were now that Ethan and I were starting a life together. I deflected gracefully, the way my grandfather had taught me. Answer the question you wish they'd asked, not the one they did. I told her I was focused on the wedding. She watched me over her salad with eyes that held a quality I recognized later as calculation. In April, 3 weeks before the ceremony, I found a drawer in my desk had been gone through. Nothing missing, just the particular disorder of things replaced by someone who knew the general location but not the exact position. The way things look when someone has tried to be careful and almost managed it. I went through the drawer. The only things there were operational documents from Whitestone. Nothing that identified ownership structures. Nothing revealing, but documents that named the company. I told myself I was being paranoid, that Ethan wouldn't do this, that I was importing my grandfather's skepticism onto someone who didn't deserve it. I told myself this convincingly enough that I almost believed it. Then the wedding happened, and it was beautiful, and Ethan cried. And at 8:07 a.m. the next morning, Patricia Whitmore was in my dining room with a notary. She opened the portfolio on my table with the unhurried deliberateness of someone who had been looking forward to this. Ethan had come downstairs in the 5 minutes it took me to close the door and process what was happening. He was in jeans and no shirt, hair not yet organized, and his face, when he saw his mother and the notary and the open folder, had a specific quality of caughtness that I registered somewhere below thought, like a vibration through the floor. Mom? He looked genuinely confused, or was performing confusion. I didn't know yet. What are you doing here? She didn't look at him. Her focus was on me, steady and pleasantly arranged, the way a predator arranges its face. I'm here to protect my son, she said. It's a mother's responsibility. She turned the folder toward me. Inside was a document printed on heavy legal stock, my name already typed in the relevant fields, and below it, I had to read this twice. Ethan's name, signing as co-managing party, a property transfer agreement. Specifically, a transfer of any and all business entities held in my name, individually or through trust, into a newly formed LLC to be managed by a board that included Patricia Whitmore, Ethan Whitmore, and 2 people I had never heard of. My name was on the transfer line. My signature line had a little adhesive arrow on it, the kind notaries use, pointing at the blank space with a cheerful orange urgency that was almost funny given the circumstances. Marriage is a partnership, Patricia said. Now that you're part of this family, your assets should be properly managed, professionally. Ethan will oversee operations. You'll still benefit, of course. I looked at the document. I looked at the notary, who had the expression of a man who deeply regretted taking this particular assignment. I looked at Ethan. What is this? I said. A simple administrative arrangement, Patricia said. Routine, really. The company, Whitestone is it, will be better protected within a family structure. The floor moved under me, not in panic, in the specific dislocation of having a private thing suddenly be in a room, spoken aloud by someone who should have had no access to it. You told her, I said to Ethan, not a question. He didn't answer immediately, and the pause was its own answer. I mentioned that I thought you might have, that there might be assets that he stopped, tried again. Claire, we're married. We shouldn't have secrets. Sign, Patricia said, nudging the pen toward me. I looked at the pen. Silver. Expensive. The kind chosen to feel like authority. I looked at Patricia's hand, perfectly steady. I looked at the document with my name already on it, prepared before my wedding night was over, brought to my door before I'd had coffee. No, I said. The word landed in the room like a door closing. Patricia's smile didn't vanish. It transformed. The warm version became the other version, and the other version was considerably sharper. Excuse me? No, I said again. I won't be signing that. You married my son under false pretenses, she said. Concealing significant assets. That's a material misrepresentation with legal implications. I laughed. I couldn't help it. A single dry sound. Not humorous exactly, but genuine. I married your son, not your trust structure, not your LLC, not whatever you planned before breakfast. The notary, Mr. Bellamy, cleared his throat carefully. I should note, as a matter of professional obligation, that no party can be compelled to sign any document. My presence here is for authentication purposes only, and I cannot. Be quiet, Patricia said. He went quiet. I looked at the table. There was a second document under the first, which I hadn't seen before. I lifted the property transfer agreement slightly, a post-nuptial agreement, and behind that, a manila folder with my name on the tab, and inside it, printed on plain paper, what appeared to be a private investigation report, bank summaries, business Business registration filings, public records that someone had assembled with professional precision. They had hired someone to investigate me before the wedding. Ethan was looking at the floor. When did you start looking into me? I asked him quietly. He didn't answer. Ethan, when? 6 months ago, he said. His voice was very small. I found some documents in your desk. I didn't understand them. I told Mom I thought that you might have business interests you hadn't mentioned. She said we should know what we were marrying into. What we were marrying into. There are sentences that change the shape of things permanently, that rewrite the past in real time, recontextualize every conversation, every moment, every instance of warmth or attention or apparent authenticity. What we were marrying into was one of those sentences. It turned 14 months of what I had believed was a love story into a different kind of story entirely. I felt something settle in my chest, cold, clear, certain. Not grief yet. That would come later, in private. Right now, something else was happening. A sequence was being initiated. A sequence my grandfather had designed and Arthur Harlan had structured, and I had spent the past 14 months, apparently, being exactly prepared for. I walked to the kitchen. I picked up my phone. I called Arthur Harlan. Arthur Harlan, senior partner at Harlan & Associates, had been my grandfather's attorney for 27 years. He was 64, measured in his speech, and absolutely unmeasured in his competence, with the specific authority of a man who had seen every variety of asset-related maneuver and was bored by none of them. When I told him 6 months after my grandfather died that I was in a serious relationship, he had a single question. Does he know about the trust? I said no. There was a pause. Keep it that way, Arthur said, until you're certain. And if you're ever not certain, call me. My grandfather had given Arthur specific instructions before his death, not just the standard trust administration protocols, those were in order, but a supplementary set of contingency measures, documented and held in escrow, that Arthur was authorized to deploy if and when a specific set of circumstances arose. My grandfather had described those circumstances with a precision that, standing in my kitchen on the morning after my wedding, I found almost terrifying in its accuracy. Someone will come, he had written. They will come early, before you've had time to prepare. They will come with documents and a claim of family authority. They will expect you to be surprised and alone. You will not be surprised, and you will not be alone. Mr. Harlan, I said, when he answered on the second ring. He was already at his desk. Arthur Harlan was always already at his desk. It's happening, exactly as he predicted. A brief silence. How many people are in the room? 3. Patricia Whitmore, my husband. A notary named Bellamy. Documents? Property transfer agreement, postnuptial. A PI report. Are the documents signed? No. Good. Don't sign anything. Don't leave the property. Give me 45 minutes. He arrived in 38 in a black SUV with 2 other vehicles behind it. The second vehicle held Margaret Chen, Whitestone's CFO, who had been with the company for 11 years and had the particular composure of someone who has professionally managed financial complexity for over a decade. The third vehicle held a man named David Okafor, a former federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice, currently in private practice, whom Arthur had retained 18 months ago at my grandfather's specific request. I did not know about David Okafor. My grandfather had arranged that particular piece of the response without telling me. I think he did it because he knew I would feel safer not knowing, that the knowledge would change the way I moved through the 14 months preceding this morning, would make me perform safety rather than inhabit it. When I saw 3 vehicles pull up to my house, something unknotted in my sternum. Patricia's composure, when Arthur walked through my door, held for approximately 90 seconds. She knew who he was. She knew what his presence meant. She had done her research. She was a thorough woman. I will give her that. And she understood that Arthur Harlan walking into a room meant that whatever she had planned was already in a more complicated situation than she had anticipated. This is a family matter, she said, placing herself squarely in the center of my dining room as though geography were a legal argument. Not anymore, Arthur said. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. He set his own briefcase on the table, black, worn, the kind that has been opened in many rooms, and looked at Patricia with the patience of someone who has all the time in the world and knows it. David Okafor stood behind him, reviewing the documents Patricia had brought. He had a yellow legal pad and a pen and was making notes with an efficiency that had a quality of inevitability to it. Margaret Chen sat down at the table and opened her laptop. Ethan, who had been standing near the wall in a progressively deteriorating posture since Arthur arrived, said, "Claire, this is too much. This is our home. You can't just—" "I can, actually," I said. "This is my home, in my name." Something I should probably have said more clearly before now. He flinched. Arthur presented Patricia with a document, a summary of the Whitestone Instruments Trust, its formation, its provisions, and the specific clauses that made the property transfer agreement she'd brought not just legally unenforceable, but potentially actionable as coercive document fraud. "You are attempting," Arthur said in the same even tone he might use to describe the weather, "to compel my client to transfer protected assets through a combination of spousal pressure and manufactured legal urgency. The document you have presented was prepared without proper disclosure, contains representations about my client's obligations that have no basis in Virginia marital property law, and was brought to her door within 20 hours of her marriage, which any court will recognize as a timing designed to exploit her trust and the social pressure of a newly formed family bond." Patricia's lawyer, she had brought her own, I would later find out, a man named Gregory Shore who had the look of someone used to winning through aggressive repetitive letter writing, was on the phone in the corner of the room, speaking in a low, increasingly strained voice. Furthermore, Arthur continued, gesturing to David Okafor, Mr. Okafor has identified in your documents 3 separate clauses that misrepresent the legal status of trust assets in Virginia. The use of a document containing known misrepresentations to obtain a signature constitutes fraud in the inducement. Additionally, the private investigation file on my client, conducted without her knowledge or consent and used here as implicit leverage, raises separate concerns under federal privacy statutes that Mr. Okafor is better placed to speak to. David Okafor looked up from the legal pad. I'll need copies of all documents, including the PI file. If it was commissioned by an attorney, we'll need to establish whether the investigation crossed any statutory lines. He said this to Patricia's lawyer, not to Patricia, which was a precision I appreciated. Margaret Chen said quietly into the silence, for the record, as of this quarter, Whitestone Instruments is valued at approximately $22.3 million. Patricia's face did something I had not seen it do before. A brief, involuntary recalibration. Just a flash, less than a second, but it was there and it was legible and it was exactly what my grandfather had described when he told me, years ago, that the clearest view of who someone is comes when the number they've been imagining turns out to be larger than expected. Ethan said, 22, and then caught himself and looked at me, and I watched him understand what he had just revealed. That's what matters to you, I said, in this moment. No. Claire, you're calculating, I said. I can see you calculating. He looked at the floor. Here is what happened in the next hour. In the order that it happened, David Okafor documented the documents. Arthur formally notified Patricia's attorney of the potential legal exposure his client faced. Mr. Rao. Bellamy, the notary, who had not said a word since Patricia silenced him, handed Arthur his business card and said in a voice barely above a whisper that he was prepared to provide a statement about the circumstances under which he had been retained for this appointment, and then collected his briefcase and left with the careful speed of a man extracting himself from a situation he wanted no professional association with. Patricia tried 4 more approaches. She cited Ethan's emotional distress. She cited my concealment of assets as a form of marital fraud. She suggested that reasonable families resolve these things privately. She finally said that my grandfather had been a controlling man who had isolated me from healthy relationships, which was the moment I stopped being composed. My grandfather, I said, is the only person in this room who actually protected me. Everything he did because he saw something like this coming. And he was right. He was completely right. Patricia's jaw tightened. He spent his last year, I continued, making sure that when this happened, when someone came with documents and a silver pen and a story about family, I would already have people in place, because he understood something about the world that I'm only now fully understanding, that the people who claim to love you for who you are sometimes mean they love you for what you have, and the two things can look identical right up until the morning after your wedding. I was not crying. I want to be clear about that. I was not crying because I was not yet processing what this meant for my marriage, for Ethan, for the 14 months I had believed were real. I was in execution mode. My grandfather had asked me to execute, and I was executing, and the grief would wait. It waited 4 more hours. The truth came out in the way truths come out when they've been under pressure. All at once. Messy, irreversible. Arthur asked Ethan, directly, whether he had searched my desk without my knowledge. Ethan said yes. Arthur asked whether he had shared information he found with his mother. Ethan said yes. And then he said, and this is the part that took me the longest to absorb, the part I have turned over and over in the months since, I didn't know what the documents meant. I just thought if she had something she wasn't telling me, Mom would know what to do. Not, I wanted to protect our relationship. Not, I was afraid of being deceived. His first instinct, when he found something he didn't understand, was to call his mother. His mother, who then hired a private investigator, retained a lawyer, and prepared a property transfer document to be executed the morning after the wedding, presumably before I'd had enough coffee to read it clearly. David Okafor asked whether Ethan had been aware, prior to the wedding, that his mother planned this visit. Another pause. She mentioned she might come by, Ethan said. I didn't know she'd bring... He stopped. I didn't think it would be like this. What did you think it would be like? I asked. He didn't have an answer. Did you marry me? I said, and I kept my voice level because I had decided I was not going to give Patricia the satisfaction of watching me dissolve. Because you loved me, or because you thought I had money? The question sat in the room. Ethan, to his partial credit and absolute damnation, told the truth. At first, he said, I loved you. At first, 2 words, 1 tense, everything. The legal resolution was, in the end, cleaner than the personal one. Arthur filed documentation with the Fairfax County Circuit Court establishing the coercive nature of the attempted transfer, supported by David Okafor's analysis of the misrepresentations in Patricia's documents. Gregory Shore, Patricia's attorney, received a formal inquiry from the Virginia State Bar within 10 days, a referral David Okafor had quietly initiated regarding whether the documents he had prepared met the standards required for legal instruments intended for signature. That inquiry, as of the last time Arthur updated me, was ongoing. The marriage was annulled on grounds of fraudulent inducement, specifically that Ethan had entered the marriage while concealing material information about his intentions, and his prior disclosure of my private financial information to a third party. The annulment was granted 6 weeks after the morning of the notary. I was a married woman for approximately 6 6 weeks, and then I wasn't. The Whitestone Instruments Trust was never touched. Not a dollar, not a filing, not a clause. My grandfather's legal architecture held exactly as designed. Patricia did not face criminal charges. I made that choice consciously. I am not sure even now whether it was the right one. There are days when I think she should have had to sit across from someone official and account for what she tried to do. But David Okafor told me that the most likely outcome would be a civil matter that took 2 years and cost me more in time and attention than the damage warranted, and my grandfather's voice was in my head again. Don't react. Execute. Executing in this case meant letting the legal exposure she already faced be sufficient. Letting her know, through Arthur's documentation, that the record existed and could be revisited. Letting that knowledge live in her, permanent and unresolvable. I think that was worse for her than any charge. Ethan called 47 times in the month after the annulment. I know the exact number because I checked. I did not answer. He sent 9 letters, actual physical letters, handwritten, which I will grant him was an effort, and I read exactly one of them before I stopped reading. The one I read contained the sentence, "I think I was confused about what I wanted, but I know now that it was you," which was the kind of sentence that might have meant something if it had arrived before a notary did. It arrived after, so it meant nothing. 8 months later, I am in the boardroom at Whitestone Instruments at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, and the people around the table are waiting for me to begin. Margaret Chen is to my left with the quarterly figures. Our head of engineering, Jerome Whitfield, is presenting the new defense contract proposal. There are 6 other people who have worked for this company, some of them longer than I've been alive, and they are waiting for me with the particular attention of professionals who respect the person they're waiting for. I am 30 years old. I own this company. I own it because my grandfather built it and left it to me, and spent the last year of his life making sure that no one could take it from me in a moment of surprise and silver pens and 8 a.m. doorbells. There is a wedding photo in my apartment that I haven't thrown away, which I suppose says something about me. Ethan has been edited out, a digital removal, clean and precise, and in his place there is just the space where he was, the background of white roses and candlelight, and me in the center of it, in a dress I was objectively beautiful in, and the expression on my face in that photograph is the thing that strikes me every time I look at it. I look peaceful, not happy in the performed way, not composed in the controlled way. Peaceful in the way you look when you are completely inside your own life, without apology, without concealment, without the low, constant hum of a secret you're carrying and haven't yet decided what to do with. My grandfather told me that money reveals people. He was right. It revealed Patricia, it revealed Ethan, and it revealed me. What it revealed about me was this: I am capable of more restraint and more decisive action than I knew. I am capable of executing under pressure. I am capable of grieving privately and working publicly and holding both things without one collapsing the other. And I am capable of standing in a boardroom at 30 years old, looking at people who are waiting for me to begin, and beginning. I don't need to protect anything anymore. I don't need to hide. I am simply here in the room that my grandfather built and left me and trusted me to run, and no one in it has a silver pen, and no one is waiting for my signature on anything except the documents that were always, legitimately, mine to sign. I open the folder in front of me. I say, let's start, and we do.